The heat shimmered above the red stone courtyard of the HFY War Academy, turning the assembled rows of cubs into a mirage of green and bronze scales. They stood in absolute silence, each gripping the ceremonial blade that would soon mark their trainer's crest. Across from them waited the veterans, towering figures of muscle and scar tissue, their eyes burning with the cold pride of generations bred for war. And among them stood one man who didn't belong. Captain Elias Ward kept his hands clasped behind his back, his stance precise but relaxed, his plain gray uniform a soft contrast to the jagged armor of the HFY instructors. The sun burned against his pale skin, and yet he didn't shift or squint. To the gathered aliens, he looked fragile, shorter, softer, unarmored. A creature of bone and breath, not scale and steel. Kor, the youngest of the cubs, stared at him with open curiosity. The human had no scent of dominance, no aura of fear or threat. He didn't carry the heavy predator's energy that made even young HFY avert their eyes. Instead, there was something quieter in him, something Kor couldn't name. A stillness that felt dangerous in a different way. The Academy elder, Servok, raised his taloned hand. "The time has come," he thundered. "Each cub will choose the warrior who will shape him into strength. Remember your blood. Choose with honor." The cubs moved forward, claws clicking on the hot stone. Tradition dictated that each youngling would kneel before a veteran whose scent and posture called to their instincts. The chosen trainer would take the cub's blade, pressing its tip to their own chest, a ritual vow of guidance and survival. One by one, the veterans were chosen. The fiercest among them, General Rakthar, the Iron Fong, was claimed first. A ripple of approval passed through the onlookers. Another cub chose Master Gar, a brutal tactician known for breaking trainees to rebuild them harder. Then Kor stepped forward. He hesitated, scanning the row of warriors. Every instinct told him to bow before Rakthar or Gar. That was what the strong did. But his eyes drifted back to the human. Elias Ward stood motionless, watching, not the cubs as potential soldiers, but as people. Kor's claws flexed. For a heartbeat, he felt something in the man's gaze that made his scales prickle. It wasn't challenge. It was understanding. He walked past every other warrior and stopped in front of the human. The courtyard fell silent. Servok's head tilted, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Cub, you stand before the soft one." Kor dropped to one knee. The blade in his hands trembled slightly as he placed it at Elias's boots. "I choose." A hiss of disbelief tore through the ranks. And then, to the elder's horror, another cub followed. Then another. Within moments, every cub in the courtyard had crossed the line of warriors and gathered at the human's feet. Elias looked down at them, expression unreadable. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. Slowly, he crouched, his knees creaking softly. His voice, when it came, was calm and low, but carried through the courtyard like a command. "Do you know why you've come here?" Kor lifted his gaze. "To learn to kill," he said. Elias shook his head. "Then you'll fail." The cubs glanced at one another, confused murmurs spreading through them. The human reached out, picking up Kor's blade. He turned it over in his hands, the polished steel catching the light. "Killing is easy. It's what comes after that breaks you. You're here to learn how to survive what killing costs." Servok's voice sliced through the silence. "Enough of this human philosophy. The cubs have been misled by curiosity, not instinct. The council will not." "Elder," Elias interrupted, his tone respectful but firm. "They made a choice. You taught them to follow strength. Perhaps they saw it in a different form." A ripple of discontent passed among the elders. But Servok's gaze lingered on Elias longer than he intended. There was something unsettling about the man's composure. No arrogance, no fear. Just quiet certainty. At last, Servok gave a dismissive wave. "So be it. You have until the turning of 2 moons. When they fail, your kind will be barred from the academy forever." Elias inclined his head. "Understood." The elders departed, muttering. The other trainers stalked away, some laughing, some glaring. The cubs remained. Elias set the blade gently on the stone between them and looked around the semicircle of young faces. "You've chosen me," he said softly. "That means you're not afraid to be wrong. That's the first step to becoming something better than what came before you." Kor tilted his head. "What will you teach us, human?" Elias stood. "How to fight without losing what makes you worth fighting for." He turned, gesturing for them to follow. The cubs obeyed, uncertain but drawn to the steady rhythm of his stride. Behind them, Servok watched from the shadow of the courtyard archway. He could not shake the image of those younglings kneeling before a creature of flesh so thin and weak it could be torn apart with one swipe. Yet, somehow, the air had shifted when the human spoke, as if the space itself bent to his quiet gravity. When the last of them vanished into the training halls, Servok exhaled slowly, his claws flexing against the stone. "We'll see what the soft one is made of," he murmured. Inside the hall, Elias led the cubs to an empty chamber lit by a single beam of sunlight cutting through the dust. He turned to face them, his shadow long against the floor. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll begin unlearning everything you think you know about strength." The cubs exchanged uneasy glances. None of them understood what he meant, but something in the man's voice carried a promise. Not of comfort, but of transformation. Kor felt it most of all. For the first time, the word trainer didn't sound like a title of dominance. It sounded like a burden. As the human turned away, Kor caught a glimpse of a small scar running down Elias's forearm, pale against his skin. It looked like it had been made by claws, HFY claws. That night, long after the torches dimmed and the dorms fell silent, Kor lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The echo of Elias's words replayed in his mind. "You're not afraid to be wrong." He wasn't sure if that made him brave or doomed. Outside, the winds of Shirvan howled against the academy walls, carrying with them the faint scent of rain, a rare thing on this scorched world. Somewhere beneath the storm's rumble, the future of two species began to shift, one quiet heartbeat at a time.
Dawn burned across the horizon in a pale orange line, spilling over the academy walls like a blade drawn from its sheath. The courtyard was silent, except for the rhythmic breathing of the cubs lined in formation. Their scales shimmered under the morning light. Their eyes focused on a human standing before them. Captain Elias Ward didn't shout. He didn't pace or brandish weapons like the HFY trainers usually did. He simply watched them, his hands tucked behind his back, his face unreadable. Kor shifted uneasily, claws scraping the stone. "We're ready, trainer," he said, his voice proud but uncertain. Elias regarded him for a long moment. "Ready," he repeated quietly, as if testing the word. "You've been trained to think readiness is about muscle, speed, or the size of your claws. It's not." The cubs glanced at each other, confused. Elias gestured to the far end of the courtyard, where a stack of heavy stones waited. "Move them," he said. The cubs obeyed instantly, sprinting across the yard, straining and grunting as they lifted the boulders and carried them back. Their bodies were built for it. Each movement was a display of brute power. Within minutes, the stones lay piled neatly at Elias's feet. He nodded. "Good. Now put them back." The cubs hesitated. "Why?" one demanded, panting. "Because I said so," Elias replied evenly. Again, they moved the stones back, irritation growing with each repetition. After the fifth time, sweat, dark and viscous, dripped from their scales. Kor's tail lashed the ground. "This is pointless," he snapped. Elias's eyes met his. "You think strength is about doing something once and succeeding. It isn't. It's about doing something meaningless until you find meaning in it." He crouched, placing a hand on one of the stones. "This weight doesn't test your arms. It tests your patience, your focus. If you can't master your mind, you'll never master fight." The cubs exchanged uncertain looks, but none dared argue further. By the time the twin suns reached their peak, they were exhausted. Elias dismissed them with a simple nod, and they stumbled toward the shade, muttering among themselves. That night, Kor couldn't sleep. His muscles ached, and his mind burned with frustration. Every lesson so far had been strange, silent observation drills. breathing exercises, wordless sparring sessions where Elias stopped them the moment they lost control. He never shouted, never punished, but somehow his quiet disapproval cut deeper than any blow. The next morning, things changed. Elias led them to the simulation dome, a massive chamber lined with hollow projectors. The air shimmered, and suddenly they stood in the middle of a burning city. Buildings crumbled, smoke filled the air, and faint cries echoed from the distance. "Your mission," Elias said calmly, "is to survive." The cubs drew their weapons, fangs bared. "Who do we fight?" one asked. Elias's voice was soft but sharp. "Yourself." The simulation began. Enemies emerged, mirrored versions of the cubs, perfect in form and strength. They attacked with ferocity, claws flashing in the firelight. The real cubs fought back instinctively, snarling and tearing, but the doubles matched every strike, every tactic. Minutes stretched into chaos. Core fought his mirror self, the clash echoing through the burning streets. The twins' movements were perfect, his own anger thrown back at him, his fear mirrored in its eyes. Each time he lunged, the double countered with ruthless precision. Elias watched from a distance, hands folded, expression calm. "You can't win by force," he said through the comms. "Learn your enemy." Core froze for a breath, watching his double circle him. He noticed the rhythm, the same pattern he'd used countless times in drills. Predictable, rigid. He exhaled slowly, letting his stance loosen, remembering Elias's words about patience and focus. The next time the double lunged, Core sidestepped, turned its own weight against it, and struck low instead of high. The double shattered into light. Silence filled the dome. One by one, the other cubs adapted, and in the simulation with bruises and burns, but also something new in their eyes. Understanding. When it was over, Elias approached them, his tone calm but steady. "You fought yourselves because that's who you'll always fight first. The part that fears, doubts, or obeys blindly. Until you conquer that, no enemy matters." Core's chest heaved. He looked at the man, sweat dripping from his chin. "We thought you'd teach us to fight like you." Elias gave a small, tired smile. "I'm teaching you to think like me. The fighting will follow." Days turned into weeks. The cubs' movements became sharper, their reactions cleaner. Elias never praised them outright, but his eyes sometimes softened with approval. They began to understand his strange methods. The way he made them run obstacle courses blindfolded to sharpen their awareness, or force them to spar in silence to teach trust and intuition. The other trainers mocked his group at first. "Ward's cubs meditate, while ours learn to kill," one sneered. But that mockery began to fade when Elias's team started breaking every academy record in the simulators. Even Servok noticed. One afternoon, he stood at the observation deck, arms crossed as Elias guided the cubs through a team scenario. The human barely spoke. Gestures and brief signals guided his students as they coordinated seamlessly, covering one another with precision. When the simulation ended, Servok descended to the floor. "You're changing them," the elder said, his tone unreadable. Elias wiped dust from his sleeves. "They're changing themselves. I just give them permission." Servok studied him for a long moment. "You fight without fury, teach without fear, yet they obey you." Elias's gaze was distant. Obedience is temporary. Understanding lasts. That evening, as the cubs gathered to rest, Core approached the human. "Trainer," he said quietly, "when you look at us, what do you see?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He watched the sunset, painting the sky in streaks of blood and gold. "I see what every soldier starts as," he said at last. "Children who believe war makes them strong." He turned to Core, his voice soft but heavy. "You'll learn soon. It's surviving peace that harder." The word stayed with Core long after Elias walked away. For the first time, he began to wonder not just how to fight, but why. The next morning, the academy's alarm shrieked through the compound. The cubs jolted awake, grabbing their gear, expecting another simulation. But the tone was different, lower, urgent, real. Over the comms, Servok's voice thundered through every hall. "All units, prepare for deployment. The outer colony is under attack." Core's pulse quickened. He looked toward Elias's quarters, expecting an order. The human emerged, calm as ever, strapping on his sidearm. For a fleeting moment, his gaze met Core's, and in that quiet, unspoken exchange, Core understood. This was no lesson. The training was over. What came next would decide whether the cubs had learned to survive, or merely to obey. The transports tore through the upper atmosphere, their hulls glowing red against the friction. Inside, the air was tight with heat, metal, and fear. The cubs sat in silence, weapons clutched at their chests, their bodies tense beneath combat armor they had never worn outside simulation. Core sat closest to the front, his claws gripping the edge of his seat as the world below grew larger, burning and broken. Across from him, Elias Ward checked the readout on his wrist display, face illuminated by the pulsing amber light of the emergency beacon. His expression remained calm, almost attached, but his eyes were alive, watchful, calculating, unreadable. The comm crackled. Hostile mercenaries confirmed on the ground. Servok's voice barked from the command feed. AAR Kai trainers are to engage. Human unit, remain in reserve. Elias gave no sign of protest. He just looked up at his cubs and said quietly, "We're not waiting." Before anyone could respond, the transport banked sharply. Elias moved to the cockpit, his voice a firm whisper to the pilot. "Put us down near the eastern ridge, out of their scanners." The pilot hesitated, but obeyed. The ship jolted, descending hard. Dust and ash swirled as the ramp slammed open. The air outside reeked of ozone and scorched metal. The horizon burned, a line of fire and falling towers. Elias stepped out first. "Stay low. Keep your lines tight. Don't fight unless you must." Core followed, heart pounding, tail lashing the dirt. Around them, the colony lay in ruins, collapsed structures, smoking corridors, echoes of distant screams. The cubs moved through debris like shadows, their training taking over, every sense sharpened. They found the first survivors huddled beneath a broken walkway. A wounded Airkai mother clutched two small hatchlings. Her eyes widened at the sight of the human leading the squad. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. Elias knelt beside her, pulling a field bandage from his pouch. "Neither should you. But we're both here now." His hands worked quickly, steady, precise. "Core, secure the perimeter." Core obeyed, scanning the ruins with a soldier's caution. The cubs formed a silent ring, weapons ready. In the distance, gunfire crackled, sharp bursts of energy. The ground trembled beneath heavy footsteps. The mercenaries arrived fast. 7 of them, tall and armored in scavenged plating, their visors glowing with predatory light. They spotted the cubs and laughed, their voices harsh through the calm static. "Children and a human," one sneered. "Easy credits." Core's breath hitched. The old instinct screamed to charge. But then Elias's voice cut through the rising panic, low and steady. "Hold." The mercenaries advanced. Elias stepped forward alone, unarmed but unflinching. "You have one chance to walk away," he said. They laughed harder. The leader raised his weapon. "And you have one chance to die with pride." The first shot cracked through the air. Elias moved faster than Core thought possible, rolling aside, grabbing a shard of metal from the ground and hurling it. It struck the mercenary's wrist, making him stumble. The cubs opened fire, not wild but coordinated, just as Elias had taught them. The fight was chaos wrapped in clarity. Core felt the rhythm of training pulse through him. Flank, cover, adapt. The cubs moved like one organism, anticipating each other's actions. Every strike had purpose. Every retreat, reason. Elias darted to the battle like a ghost. No armor, no weapon beyond scavenged scraps and instinct. He used the terrain, turning walls and smoke into allies. When a mercenary cornered one cub, Elias drove a shock baton into the back of his knee, toppling him. The man screamed as Elias slammed him unconscious with a single, precise blow. Core found himself face to face with the mercenary leader. The alien towered above him, armor gleaming, claws dripping with someone's blood. Core swung, missed, and the mercenary's counterblow sent him crashing to the ground. The world blurred. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Elias shout something, but not a command, a warning. The mercenary raised his blade. Before it could fall, Elias was there between them, his arm catching the strike meant for Kor. The weapon tore through flesh, blood blooming across his sleeve. The human didn't stop. He drove forward, disarming the mercenary and slamming the butt of the baton against his visor, shattering it. The alien collapsed, unmoving. Elias staggered back, clutching his arm. Kor rose, shock flooding his chest. You're hurt. Elias's voice was strained but steady. Then don't make it for nothing. Finish it. The cub turned, fury tempered by precision. The last mercenary fell moments later. The battlefield went quiet, smoke coiling up into the dim red sky. The only sound was the ragged breathing of survivors and the low hum of dying machinery. Elias sank to one knee, blood pooling at his side. The cubs surrounded him, their earlier fear replaced by something new, a fierce, protective resolve. Servok's voice crackled through the comms again, sharp with disbelief. Ward, you disobeyed direct orders. Elias wiped blood from his mouth, glancing at the wounded family now safe behind the rubble. So, did they, he said softly. Seems I taught them well. The silence that followed was heavy. For once, even Servok had no answer. A retrieval team arrived an hour later, led by grim-faced Airkai commanders. They surveyed the field, the bodies of mercenaries, the rescued civilians, the cubs standing guard over their human trainer. It was a tableau none of them expected to see. Elias refused a stretcher, insisting on walking to the transport under his own power. His steps were slow but steady. As he passed the cubs, he stopped beside Kor. You led well, he said. Kor's throat tightened. I just followed what you taught. Elias shook his head faintly. No, you followed what you believed. He turned, stepping onto the ramp. The medics surrounded him, tending to his wounds as the engines ignited. From the open hatch, he looked back one last time. The cubs stood in formation, battered but unbroken, their eyes fixed on him, not with awe, but with understanding. Kor raised his blade in salute, the gesture mirrored by the others. The moment burned itself into memory, one of those rare instances where respect and gratitude became the same thing. As the transport lifted, the wind swept to the ruined colony, carrying the scent of fire and blood. Kor watched until the ship vanished into clouds. The battle was over, but something deeper had begun, a shift in the way the Airkai would remember humanity. For the first time, Kor understood the truth behind his trainer's quiet words. Strength wasn't in the strike or the roar. It was in the choice to stand when everyone else knelt. Above the broken world, the humans' transport disappeared into the red sky, leaving behind not just silence, but the first echo of change.
The infirmary was quiet except for the steady rhythm of medical instruments and the faint hum of artificial light. Captain Elias Ward lay on a narrow bed, his left arm bound in silver bandages, the scent of antiseptic heavy in the air. The battle was days behind them, yet its echoes lingered, phantoms of gunfire, the screams of civilians, and the unbearable heat of the burning colony. He had dreamed of it again the night before, waking to find his pulse racing and his mind still on the field. But when the door opened, the noise inside his head fell silent. Kor stepped in first, followed by the rest of the cubs. Their armor was gone, replaced by simple robes of the Academy's crest. They looked older somehow, less wild, more certain. The fire that had once burned recklessly behind their eyes had become something steadier, deeper. Kor stopped at the foot of the bed and bowed his head. You should be resting, Elias said quietly. His voice carried that dry warmth that always cut through tension like a blade through fog.
Kor shook his head.
We wanted to see you. The elders called a gathering. They're speaking your name. Elias frowned slightly, shifting upright. That rarely ends well. Kor's mouth twitched in what passed for a smile. Maybe this time it will. An hour later, he stood before the AAR-Kai Council, the great chamber filled with the scent of burning oils and the low hum of distant thunder. The elders sat on raised platforms of obsidian, their gazes heavy as the air itself. Servok stood beside them, his arms folded, expression unreadable. Elias bowed his head. You asked for me. We did, Servok said, his tone measured. Your actions at the colony defied direct orders. You endangered yourself and your trainees. Yet the outcome speaks otherwise. The civilians live. The enemy lies dead. Another elder hissed softly. Luck. Reckless luck. No, Servok interrupted, his voice sharper. Not luck. Method. The word hung there like a spark over dry tinder. The hall murmured. Servok turned to Elias. Your students fought with coordination unseen in any cub unit. They protected one another, anticipated, adapted. They fought with reason, not rage. You've changed them. Elias met the elder's gaze without pride or defiance. They changed themselves. I only showed them another way. Servok nodded slowly, something almost like respect flickering in his eyes. Perhaps. The council has decided to make your methods a part of the Academy's doctrine. It will be known as Ward training. Elias's brow furrowed. I didn't come here to found a doctrine. Servok's lip curved faintly. No one who changes history ever means to. The decision was sealed with a ceremonial strike of the elder's staff against the floor. The chamber filled with low murmurs and the rustle of movement. As Elias turned to leave, Servok's voice stopped him once more. You bled for them, the elder said quietly. Why? Elias paused at the threshold, the faint light catching the edge of his bandage. Because they would have done the same for me. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, a rare and precious thing on Shirvan. The air smelled of dust and renewal. Kor waited near the entrance, standing at attention but unable to hide the faint pride gleaming in his eyes. It's true then, he asked. Ward training. Elias nodded once. Seems so. Kor looked down, his voice low. They say you're leaving when you heal. I am, Elias said. Humans don't stay long in one place. We're better at moving forward. Kor hesitated, then stepped closer. You taught us how to fight, but you also taught us something else. To think, to feel, to choose. His throat worked. When I take my own trainees, I'll teach them that too. Elias studied him for a moment before placing a hand on the young warrior's shoulder. Then I did my job. The cup-turned soldier bowed deeply, a gesture once reserved for heroes of legend. Elias turned away before the weight of it could settle too heavily in his chest. The following morning, the transport waited at the edge of the landing field, engines humming softly beneath the gray sky. The academy loomed behind him, towers sharp against the horizon. He could feel eyes on him, hundreds of cubs watching from the terraces. Some saluted. Others simply stood in silence. Kor was among them, armor polished, the new insignia of his rank gleaming on his chest. As Elias approached the ramp, Kor called out, his voice carrying across the wind. Trainer, what should we tell the next generation when they ask what makes a human different? Elias turned, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Tell them it's not what makes us different. It's what makes us care. He raised a hand in farewell and stepped aboard. The ramp sealed with a hiss, and the transport rose, cutting through the rain toward the pale clouds above. Kor stood long after it disappeared from view. The storm rolled over the academy, washing the dust from the stones, making the banners ripple like living flame. He felt the pulse of something new beneath his feet, a quiet strength born from compassion, not conquest. Weeks later, he stood before a new line of cubs, their eyes bright with the same curiosity he once carried. He spoke softly, repeating words that had never been written in any AAR Kai manual. Strength isn't what you can crush. It's what you can carry. They listened as he once had. And for a moment, he could almost hear the echo of a human voice in the wind. Far beyond the academy, Elias Ward's transport streaked through the black of space, bound for another world in need of something he could never name but always carried, an unyielding belief in what life could become if only taught to see beyond fear. He leaned back in his seat, the stars blurring past the window. His wounded arm still ached when he moved it, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him that even in survival there was cost, and in every cost meaning. He closed his eyes, hearing again the laughter of the cubs, the clash of training swords, the quiet rustle of rain on alien stone. The universe was vast and cold, but he had seen warmth take root in places where no one believed it could. Somewhere out there, new students would kneel, uncertain and unshaped, waiting for a voice to guide them. And maybe, one day, another human would answer that call. Until then, the lesson would live on, carried not in blood or battle, but in memory. On the world he left behind, the AAR Chi cubs trained under a new creed. They stood taller, fought smarter, and when they saluted, they touched not their weapons, but their hearts, an old human gesture, born of faith and friendship. In every corner of the stars, whispers spread of the fragile man who taught warriors to be more than killers. And though Elias Ward's name would fade into legend, his lesson would not. Because somewhere, across the firelit skies of 1,000 worlds, young soldiers still knelt at the feet of a ghost and waited for the human's voice to begin again.